Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge YouTube channel. You've probably heard that Sun Yang, the Chinese Olympic swimmer, has been banned for 8 years from swimming.
The Court of Arbitration for Sport has upheld the appeal filed by the World Anti-Doping Agency against the Chinese swimmer Sun Yang and the International Swimming Federation FINA. The athlete is sanctioned with an 8-year suspension starting today.
You may have seen this media release on the Court of Arbitration for Sport's website. This isn't the full decision and reasons. That'll come out in the next week or so, I think. FINA have acknowledged the decision. WADA have welcomed the decision. They were obviously the applicant in this appeal. And just to bring you up to speed, in case you weren't aware, this relates to an aborted doping testing mission carried out at Sun Yang's home in September 2018, where he supplied blood to the testers and then questioned the accreditation of the testers, and then subsequently those blood vials were destroyed. Initially, he was brought before the FINA Doping Panel, and that report was leaked to the Daily Telegraph in June 2019 last year. They decided not to apply any punishment or suspension to Sun Yang despite it being a close-run thing, according to that judgment. And then WADA, the World Anti-Doping Authority, have applied to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, appealing that FINA Doping Panel decision. So there was a public hearing in November 2019 for that appeal at CAS, and the decision was handed down yesterday, February 28th. So that's the timeline. Try and put it on the screen there. But in this video, I want to try and pick out some of the key things that have come out of this judgment, how that interacts with what the FINA Doping Panel inquiry or hearing said, and look at some of the problems that happened during that public hearing, and potentially how Sun Yang could actually still compete at the Tokyo Olympics this year if they're on.
The CAS panel unanimously determined that the personnel in charge of the anti-doping test at the residence of Sun Yang in September 2018 complied with all applicable requirements set out in the WADA International Standard for Testing.
So what CAS seemed to have decided is slightly different to what the FINA Doping Panel said. In their report, they decided that the blood collection assistant, not the doping control officer, but the blood collection assistant who was the nurse, did not present proper qualifications to Sun Yang, and the blood collected by an individual not possessing proper qualifications and not in a position to show those to the athlete is a proper ground to abandon the blood collection session. This is one of Sun Yang's main arguments, and I kind of empathise with him in that how are you to know who is an appropriate or an accredited doping control officer? If someone just walks up to you on the street, same with a police officer. Police officers have to show you their badge. These people are coming to take your blood or your urine. So his argument is that they should have a really high threshold of showing you appropriate qualifications. I got no idea whether that's right or wrong for the blood collection assistant or for the doping control assistant. That's the male who's supposed to witness the athlete Sun Yang providing the urine sample. The doping control officer, who's like the person in charge, she was a woman. And this hasn't got a lot of play, but this is from the FINA Doping Panel report. Apparently, there was a run-in when she was being trained. In 2017, she attended on a testing of Sun Yang, and he wrote comments on the doping control form then that she wasn't properly accredited, and the doping control officer then noted that Sun Yang was really rude and abusive. So then almost a year, 18 months later, she turns up, and he knew, like, she was a doping control officer, she was fully trained at that point, and then there's another issue with the accreditation rearing its head.
Secondly, that the athlete failed to establish that he had a compelling justification to destroy his sample collection containers.
So even if he did have queries about their appropriate accreditation, CAS didn't think that was enough to then actually destroy the blood sample and not provide a urine sample. But this was an appropriate authorization or accreditation sort of dispute between Sun Yang and the testers, and CAS decided, obviously, that it didn't really fit into those three categories.
Thirdly, that it was not for the athlete to decide alone that an anti-doping test shall be invalidated and the sample containers destroyed.
And I think there's pretty compelling reasons why athletes shouldn't be able to just dispute the accreditation of officials if they have shown some, and these officials did show, especially the doping control officer, she showed appropriate accreditation. And this was alluded to in the FINA Doping Panel report. Sun Yang got really bad advice from his doctor and whoever else was advising him that night. She provide the sample, note all irregularities and complaints on a doping control form, and then we've seen in the past, if there are irregularities in the collection of the sample, even despite a positive test, it's going to be really hard for WADA or FINA or whoever to actually enforce that positive test if the athlete can claim, well, you didn't have accredited people and it was mishandled. And according to the WADA Council, this accreditation that was provided to Sun Yang, the same level of accreditation was provided to him in previous tests. So then the CAS spokesperson, he tried to go back into the tribunal headquarters. He came out and said, I've got no more information for you, but then actually provided a fair bit more information.
Je n'ai pas plus d'informations à vous communiquer que ce que je vous ai dit maintenant. Un recours est possible auprès du tribunal fédéral suisse dans un délai de 30 jours. À partir d'aujourd'hui. À partir du moment où il reçoit la décision.
So he said there that Sun Yang can appeal this decision, the CAS decision, to the Federal Supreme Court of Switzerland, because obviously CAS sits in Switzerland. Sun Yang has already said publicly to Xinhua that he intends to appeal this decision, so he has 30 days to do that from receipt of the decision, which he's now received.
S'il y a un recours au tribunal fédéral, l'athlète peut demander un effet suspensif. D'accord. Mais il doit le demander et le tribunal peut décider si c'est oui ou si c'est non. Donc ce n'est pas automatique.
So what he said there is an appeal is not automatically granted, and any appeal is going to be on narrow procedural grounds. It won't be re-examining the whole merits of the case. But if his application for an appeal is granted, then the court may actually stay the enforcement of the CAS decision, which would mean that he actually could compete at the Olympics if the next appeal was heard after the Tokyo Olympics. And I think some of the grounds on which Sun Yang could be appealing on is that there were significant translation issues during the hearing. I think this is borne out by one of the most bizarre scenes I've seen in a court or tribunal or arbitration or whatever. Sun Yang became frustrated with the translation of his oral recount of his written statement, and he calls to some guy in the public area behind him to come and offer translation service. So your man gets called out from the back and shivvied out.
Okay.
Apparently he's a translator, independent translator, and then the court's like, hold on. Confusion reigns, and then this is Meakin, the barrister for Sun Yang. And then Meakin goes over to this guy, and it cuts out, it fades away, but you can see he kind of points pretty angrily to the guy to go back to where he came from. Which is a bit strange. Maybe he knew who this guy was and they'd already decided, nah, Sun Yang, you're going to use the WADA translation services. I thought that was a bit interesting. And they come back from the 1 minute break. But the translation issues persisted. And then when Sun Yang went off script, this is at the end of his oral statement at the end of the hearing, it kind of all broke down again. I do feel bad for him. Statistically, the ethnographic mix of the CAS panel members is largely Anglo-European members. Asian, Russian, African members underrepresented. Not saying that actually had an effect on the decision in this case, but that's a statistical fact that members from those countries in Asia and Russia and Africa are underrepresented. From a perception of impartiality perspective, I don't personally think that's a great look. They should probably have a bigger mix of panel members from different countries appearing, given that the athletes come from a wide variety of countries around the world. But the chair of the CAS panel, or president of the CAS panel, he kind of foreshadowed the issues that Sun Yang may raise in an appeal when he said everyone's had their right to be heard respected. Does anyone have any objections? And Sun Yang's barrister Meekin said he agreed that everyone had their right to be heard and respected. Not sure why he said that, but anyway. And then when the hearing finished, Sun Yang got up and, pretty weird actually, just bowed to the crowd. I think there was a large Chinese contingent in the crowd. So we'll wait in the next week or so to read the judgment from CAS. They'll have more details in their reasons in that judgment. Regardless, none of Sun Yang's previous performances and medals will be stripped because he never tested positive. So he's just an 8-year ban, which is the maximum.
The results achieved by Sun Yang in the period prior to the CAS award being issued are not retroactively disqualified.
And the big takeaway for this is, and Mac Horton said this last year as well, you've got to always remember, number one rule of sports is that the only athletes that ever dope are from China and former Soviet bloc countries and Russia. Athletes from America, UK, Australia never dope. The reason they're at the top of the medal table is just through hard work and determination. Another big takeaway is if you don't want to get an anti-doping rule violation, instead of appearing and arguing with the doping control officers, what you want to do is have a doorbell that doesn't work. That's a pretty good way to, even if it is during your 1 hour window where you said you'll be at home, just have a doorbell that doesn't work. And that way you don't have to open the doorbell if the testers arrive. But I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, something a little bit different. Like the video if you like the breakdown. Subscribe if you haven't already. We've now covered running, cycling and swimming, basically a triathlete channel, and I'll see you later. Ciao.